Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 47. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, John White, at @BJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Doing great, John. We are VMware solution engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Great, Nick. I'm excited for the second half of the interview with Keiran Shelden. This time, we're going to dive into the meat of his article, You, Your Health, and the Data Center.
Isn't it funny how we didn't actually get to his article until part 2? It was to me anyway. But it was also intriguing how self-pressures and ego can definitely cause us to take unnecessary risks. Does that ever happen to you, John?
Yeah, it definitely has. Ego is definitely my kryptonite. It's led me to burnout probably a couple times. But let's hear our guest story. IT Burnout with Keiran Shelden. So speaking of blogging and social media, maybe we could talk about this post that caught our eye. And this, I should maybe give a little bit of background. I think Nick and I talked about this article that you wrote, You, Your Health, and the Data Center, back when we were first starting doing our podcasting. It just was in a segment that we ended up cutting as we were first getting used to doing podcasting. So we didn't really ever publish anything that we talked about. But if you could maybe go through the article and kind of the events that led up to it and maybe give an overview of what you took away, that would be really terrific for our listeners.
Yeah, so this article I wrote, it was basically a brain dump the day after I finished this massive project. And it kind of came down to the business needed to downsize the infrastructure that they had. It had grown too big, and we actually had a deadline of the end of the month because it was going to start costing more money, and the company didn't want to do that. So there was a hard set deadline. And I was in charge of decommissioning the whole project, so decommissioning the data center. And I had to list out what customers we had in this data center. I had to list out what infrastructure we were running, what was relying on what connections externally, internally, and break it all down. But then, being a small team, it ended up that I then took on the role of going out to the data center and doing the full decommissioning. But at the same time, it also meant that I was moving customers, and I had to move customers after hours. If we did it during business hours, then we probably wouldn't have those customers anymore with a bit of downtime. But there was this process that we had to get in place. And what the first week I was going out to the data center, I would start pulling equipment that was redundant and was no longer needed, and that worked out well. But then the final week, we sort of had a few other things happen in the organization that I couldn't keep up with the schedule that I'd set. And in the last week, it got to this point where I had to go out every night and be migrating customers, decommissioning hardware that was there, and moving devices from certain racks into other racks. And it was just this swapping around. So to paint a picture of what the data center was, we had 8 racks, but we wanted to consolidate down to only 3 racks. But we had equipment that was running in the 6th rack, that we wanted to move down into the third rack, but that was like our data stores. So there was massive downtimes that we had to plan for. And just getting those sorts of notifications out to customers saying that we're going offline for this time because we have to make this change, and things like that. It really set these, not just from a physical side, but from a mental capacity to be able to go through this process was really draining at that time. So I ended up, I spent a lot. It wasn't just physical; it was mental time, just trying to focus on what we had to do, and who we had to notify, and what order things need to be done, because we could still we could still hairpin back traffic back to the old data center into the new data center at the same time, and try and limit as much downtime. And just doing calculations in your head at the same time while pulling it apart just was, it was a huge drain. So I ended up spending about 60 hours in 4 days was what ended up being the last week of getting this completed. And there was a lot of, this blog post was essentially a reflection of those 60 hours of just, there were so many things that could have gone wrong. And I was just looked back at it and went, if I just can't do that, and I can't do that anymore. If I did that and something had gone wrong, I probably wouldn't have even written that blog post. So it was sort of a big reflection. And I ended up taking some quite severe risks in that. And it wasn't just in the data center. I was driving, to break it down, what these 60 hours pretty much involved of work was, I started Sunday and I worked through the night until about 4 a.m. I left the data center, drove home, got 1 hour sleep, went back to the office to prepare for the next night, to do the tickets that I had sitting in my queue for the day-to-day. And then I was back out went home, had dinner, went back out to the data center. And as I was in my younger years, I could do that, which I've never actually done it for that long either. But I thought I've been able to survive late nights, long nights, 24-hour nights, and unfortunately, this is the turning point where I just went, I can't do that. I stretched myself to my limits, and there were things that I was doing that I didn't even think about. I went in and I wouldn't take breaks. I just kept going and going. And there was at one point towards the end of the time, I nearly dropped a data center switch on my head. And that kind of woke me up into what was going on. And luckily on the last night, I got to the point where I actually asked for help and had someone else come out and help me on the final night, where we did the big data store, the sand move and moving all that across, which just, and since that point, I now ask for help when something big comes up. I don't take that all on. So it sort of broke me from that point.
So if I'm understanding correctly, and you can tell me if, this is if I am actually understanding it, it was really more about, the project wasn't a disaster, but you kind of wanted to document, at least for yourself, how you followed what was a fragile process instead of a more a process that was more resilient and was less risky. And a lot of that risk ended up being working yourself too much. Is that right?
Yeah. So it comes down to that I didn't actually understand what my limits were going to be, and I pushed that. I pushed that too much, and it could have the failure would have been if something had happened to me in that time. The process in the actual migrations weren't a failure. but it was where I found that I failed was and I touched on it a bit in there, is that I got really quite sick afterwards, and my
Hmm.
body couldn't cope, and it just I was sick for 3 or 4 days afterwards, and I lost a lot of weight in that time as well. And that was that time when I was actually sick afterwards. It wasn't I didn't lose the weight during that time, during the migration, but it was during the that time I got sick, and yeah, doing that to my body, I just that sort of it became that turning point where I just went, yeah, I'm really not doing well, to do what I did, and I don't think anyone else should. Um, we are all sort of determined in our jobs. We want to do the job that we are hired for. But we want to go out and beyond what we think or what our general day to day is, and do our best. And I sort of took that on as the whole role for myself, and I've come to find that that actually could have actually been the end of it as well. It is okay to ask for help. It is okay to say, I'm struggling with this, part of the project. I know it's my project, but I need some guidance. I need help. You're not weak in asking that. You are, in doing so, you actually are doing your job better. The outcome could have been even better than what, the outcome was at that point in time. So yeah, in myself, I feel like I failed myself in not looking after myself, and also having a young family in that. It yeah.
What do you think are the risk factors for people? Because this isn't the only story of, working oneself to the absolute limit. I've done it. Maybe Nick's talked about doing it in the past. I feel like I've heard this story over and over. Um, in yourself, are there things that you can identify within yourself that are risk factors that lead you down this path? Because I'm sure that nobody sets out, right, to say, well, I'm just going to put myself at the absolute limit and maybe a little bit past just to get this task done. There's a series of compromises that we make within ourselves, or that lead us down this path, and all of a sudden we're past the limit. So have you been able to look back and identified, I think you said a little bit earlier, ego might have been one of the things that you ran into in the past. Are there other things, or maybe even just expand on that ego point?
Yeah, so I think for me, as I've gone through my career, I actually went through a bit of a stage um, where I felt that in the organization, were talking about me behind my back in certain things I've done, and that sort of has followed me into this other organization, which hasn't happened. It wasn't the case, but because I had this prior experience, I I sort of have that fear just sort of comes over that, well, those two people have gone, and I know I did something wrong yesterday, or something, but these two people have gone and had a meeting. Is it about me? Is it about, what's it about? And having that fear, I guess, sort of comes over me and going, I mustn't be doing my job right. And I put myself to show that I can do that. And there have been incidents, so this was about, I might clarify that, this was about, just over 3 years into, myself working at this organization. So there has been incidents where I might have done something wrong, whether it was a, migration that didn't work out as it should have, or, those sorts of incidents happen. And no one's perfect. We all make mistakes in that. But it got sort of to this point where, I think when I was doing this particular project, that I took it on, and took it on myself, that I needed to, um, that I just needed to put my foot forward and make sure I was getting it done. That I showed that I could, do something right, could complete that task, could, and do all that. And again, it sort of goes back to where, that asking for help. If I didn't, if I had asked for help, then I'm showing that I can't do it all. I can't complete something successfully. and that. So it was kind of a build up over time of having that repeat in my head of other incidents to get to that point. Yeah. Which then the risk at the end sort of became a bit of a burnout as well, where I had still had all this stuff going on. I've kind of failed this. I've not done this right, and what's going to be said about me with my time that I'm there. And all that's playing through my head as well at the same time. So it sort of complicated things a little bit for me.
So insecurity. That's the word it
Yeah,
sounds like you're talking about. All
absolutely.
right.
That insecurity has been quite strong for me, and that's sort of been something from my high school days of being bullied and that. And I think something that we don't realize is that um, the effects from when we are kids can also affect us a lot when we are older as well. They can come back and bite us. There's a book that I'm reading at the moment. It's an autobiography of Osher Gunsberg, and he was a presenter on Australian Idol and that. And he talks about in his book at the start about fear, and he talks about how he's built up. When he was 3, there was a video that he's remembered that was playing on TV, and the fear from that, how it's transpired into his life now, into his older years, and that. And so I see that I reflected on that of all these sorts of things where people talking behind my back or just thinking these through is actually a from those years when I was being bullied back in school, and that has sort of come through to these later years, and it sort of just puts it into perspective of that. So it's one thing where I now have to I've identified that and I'm working on that, and that's where I now know from doing this project. Every project I've done since, I've made sure here's my limit. I need help. Or I need to do this, or I need to ask this question, and it's sort of broken that.
I think it's sort of human nature when we get these projects that are what you might consider as a breakthrough or something that you think could make or break your career, the success or failure of it, we put all this pressure on ourselves to perform, just as you said. And I think the curse of knowledge is that you know what you know, and you tend to try and match patterns, and that oftentimes can create those fears that you're mentioning that we sometimes can't shake. But the fact that you are aware of the fact that you have these fears and that you need to guard against them because not everything will be exactly the same is a very good thing. A nice lesson for others to learn from.
I'd probably chime in on that and say that, in television or in the movies, when you make the realization, that usually solves it, right? But in the real world, like having the realization that you're following that pattern is almost like the actual first step to working on solving it, as opposed to magically solving it. I don't know if that's been your experience, but it's been mine anyway.
Yeah, I'm not saying magical solution. I'm just saying the fact that you're aware of it can help you work on it. Yeah, great point.
Definitely.
Did you have any Disney magic moments along with this, Karen? Just curious. I'm just teasing.
Well, I might have watched a little bit of Disney films with my daughter during this over the last couple of years, but identifying those times where I haven't thought the process through, or I've had these little fears come up, and that going back to those and focusing on those is helping to shape what I need to do now as well. So, and as I keep going through that, then I end up doing my job better, doing not just my job, living life better as well. And because it's not just in asking for help in that, my presenting, my That's one thing actually is I struggle to present in front of a crowd. At the same thing of the fear of what is everyone saying to about me? What are they thinking as I'm presenting? I'm stumbling over this. I'm struggling to get my point across. I know this really well. I know exactly what I want to say, but as soon as I get up there and start talking, my head becomes cloudy. So, and it's the same thing here. I had coming into this podcast, being that it's my first time podcasting, and having this sort of discussion. I over the weeks I've been planning. Yep, this is what I want to say. This is I'll cover this, but then my head goes grey. I get that grey matter in there and start stumbling over it. But at the same time, I'm just going. We're just three guys having a chat, and it sort of allows me to get into that flow and slow down and start thinking about what I need to talk about as well. But yeah, that sort of fear still comes up a lot, and it takes a lot of working to get there.
So this actually reminds me of something I think that we've talked about before, and that's kind of like the two modes of thought that you can be in any given time, which is um, I think about it as storytelling mode, where you're talking about the past, thinking about the past, all the things that have brought you here, the future, um, all the the things that might result as a as a happen as a result of this, and even kind of the present, like other people thinking and talking about what you're doing in the moment. So that's storytelling mode, and then the other mode is experiential, which is very I'm in the moment, I'm grounded, I'm the only thought I really have in my head is what I'm talking about right now, the point I'm trying to get across, the information that I have experienced, that I'm trying to share with this group of people, one, two, three, many. And you can't really be in both modes of operation, right? You can be in the storytelling mode, you can be in the experiential mode, you can't be in both. And I've noticed that pattern over and over again in myself, in other people, and you just summed it up like terrifically. When you're in that reflective mode where you're wondering what people are talking about, saying about you, thinking about you, it just is very, very difficult to then turn around and get that information and do the thing that you're doing. As soon as you stop that and you let go of it, everything gets better, no matter what it is that you're doing. It could be your job, it could be dealing with your family, it could be, just driving, right? So it's just been, it's amazing to hear you say that. It's just a pattern I've seen over and over again. No question, just an observation.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, there's this particular blog post. I after I had posted on Twitter, about a couple of weeks afterwards, I started thinking that this is actually something I need to develop and present. I actually had I started creating my PowerPoint and going, well, I'm going to present this at a VMUG or at a UserCon, something like that. I thought it was quite strong, but I just didn't end up completing that. And it's sort of, again, that fear of I'm getting up in front of people and explaining it. But this is my story as well. This is what I went through. Um, I, I can talk about it, and I think particularly after this recording, I'm going to get back onto that sort of bandwagon and turn it into a proper presentation and break it down a lot more than that post and a couple of things that we talked about as well. So and turn that into a proper presentation and go, all right, if I'm going to do a first presentation and in front of a UserCon or something like that, in front of a number of people, that's not within my business, not people that I know. And that's the thing. People I know in my business and that, I'll get up and talk, perfect. People I don't know, people who don't know me, that's where it all comes in, that fear. So I'm going to use this as like a stepping stone and hopefully that would be my first time presenting and go, here's my story, and this is it. And that's all it has to be, is when you present, it's a story. I mean, it's easier said than done, but yeah, like I can talk about it and say that it's as simple as that. But actually doing it and clearing the mind of that fear is the hard part.
Well, now you have to do it since, this has been said on the air. We're going to hold you to it. And by the way, if you need help crafting the thesis of the presentation or any of the details around that, John or I would be happy to help you. I mean, I'll volunteer. I'll volunteer John as well, just because
Absolutely.
Excellent.
sometimes it's hard to get the idea down so that it's accepted as a submission. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
the great thing about it, just like you said, no one can argue with things that you've experienced because you're the only one who experienced it. So that's the great thing about it. You just tell the story, and I like it. I think it'll be good.
absolutely not. Yeah, I appreciate that too. As you know, I am a member of the John White School of Mentoring, so I certainly will take you up on that.
Yeah, we're just waiting
I
on those
guess,
checks to come in.
yeah.
That's it.
Have
Goes,
the
it's the mail.
Okay, all right. I'll rely on Nick to make sure that everything's cleared.
Yeah,
And
we'll take care of it. No problem, John. I'll give you your 0.5% commission that you're supposed to make off this.
okay, all right. I I'm curious if there's other things along the line now that you would have, looking back on this process where, things ramped up, right? Were there things that you would identify now as, oh, here was an indication that I was getting overwhelmed. Here's another one. Were you getting more irritable? Were you like, even though you're fatigued and only getting 1 hour sleep, were you having problems, or were you only getting 1 hour sleep because you're having problems falling asleep, or you know problems concentrating? Any other things that you would call out now and say, oh, here's what I should have realized, that this was too much?
Yeah, well, that certainly with that 1 hour sleep, that was all I could afford to be able to keep doing my job through the day and through the night. It wasn't what I should have done was gone to the business and said, I've been up all night and I just need to stay home, do half a day, sleep it off and that. But I forced myself to do that. I said, I finish at 4, at least I get some sleep. And then my day was get up, get my daughter ready for daycare, send her off, go and do a day's work, come home, dinner, go back out to the Datacenter, get things moving. And I thought taking those small breaks away from work would have been enough, and having that hour of sleep. But yeah, I was getting to the point where I knew I was missing out on family time for one, and that's a big thing with a young family. And I actually identified that afterwards as well as extremely critical. Even now, I have nights where I've got to I got to go out. I've got to do this work in the data center, but I've been at work all day. But I make sure that when I come home, I organise that to be after 9 o'clock, that I need to be out there, because that family time is important. And I'm making sure that I'm trying to work out that work-life balance as well, which is hard to do. But yeah, it's just that working, this is where my work is important, because it's going to keep the business running, and keeping the business running is a priority because that keeps food on my table, on the family's table. But at the same time, working in the business, helping the business, keeping the business running, well, why am I having food on my table if I don't have a family either? So it's sort of finding that balance and that as well. And yeah, when I got sick, I was home and my daughter was playing and all that. I couldn't play with her because I was bedridden. And it just, yeah, that became a turning point of, I went too far. I've missed all this time.
It's interesting because, again, as individuals, we take all this stuff on, and I have definitely taken on things like that. But for example, if somebody asked me to manage a team that was doing that, I would never ask individual people on that team to do so much work that they were only able to spend an hour asleep. Like that would never enter my mind. I would say, oh, if that's what's being required, then we don't have enough resources on this team, and it's a mismanagement of my resources in order to have, team members doing this. Or I would have gone to the business and said, hey, I need more resources because I'm having to ask people to do this. So obviously I've made a mistake. But if we take on that role of almost being the project manager and being, one of the people or the only team member that's doing this, then it feels like a weakness in a way that somehow negatively reflects upon us, right? I'm having to work 20 hours, and my project management is no good. It's like, well, maybe one thing is a result of the other.
Yeah. So bit more of a background to that was just a month before that we actually let go three employees from different departments. So we had actually downsized the company as well, and and I guess management weren't aware. I wasn't letting them know as well how much I was doing. They knew that I was working up all these hours and that, but they were I wasn't telling them the full story as well because I was just there doing my job. Got to keep it going. Let's go out. And then by about the second night was when I actually said no. But this last night we have to have another team member. We've got to make sure that someone else is there to help me move all this. Um, it also ended up being that it was the networking equipment, so we ended up getting the network engineer out as well to make sure it was moved properly. Um, and yeah, it took a bit, but I wasn't passing on, I guess, all the information to be able to resource have myself uh, with the amount of resources that I needed.
Well, it's also subtle, right? When people have been let go, like very recently, to then turn around and go, "Hey, I can't necessarily do this job." It almost feels like you're exposing yourself as, quote unquote, weak, right
Mm.
when people have been laid off. And I don't know if that's conscious or unconscious. That can be an influence as well.
Yes, that really hits home with me, John, because in 2016, 2015 timeframe, we went from a department of 4 to 2 in the span of 10 days, and I just couldn't let it go, man. I was working 12 to 16-hour days and couldn't sleep, like you said. I wasn't willing to let the quality of service for end users suffer, and I just about worked myself to death until we hired more people. So I can totally see how management might have no clue the effort that you're putting in because of the fact that you have fewer resources. And it's unfortunate, but sometimes we just aren't willing to let it go. I know I wasn't.
Right.
I still have that problem sometimes.
Yeah, and I guess a follow up project that I had about a year later um, actually ended up being sort of a similar situation where I was under resourced. And it was actually in another state where I got sent down with our CTO to build up a new data center in 2 days. And that actually, we didn't have to install any software or anything like that, didn't have to migrate the customers while we are there. But it was when it was just doing the physical build. And we pushed ourselves again that time, but because I had experience the year before, this particular project we're talking about, I then when we did this project, I made sure that we took breaks every hour. I was saying we need to go for a drink. Let's go do this. It's lunchtime. We need to stop. We need to take breaks, which meant that the final hour we might have cut a couple of corners here and there with how we labeled things. We didn't necessarily make sure that things were labeled cleanly, but the labels were still on there. it just meant that we rushed a little bit at the end. But at the same time, we looked after ourselves. We made sure that we were making sure that we were still doing a good job and keeping our sanity, that we then, when we went back to the business so we went down on the Monday, Tuesday. So when we went back to the office on the Wednesday, we were able to be able to be an employee again. We were able to work the normal business day. Had we not taken those breaks, and that, it could have been a whole nother story. We might have been off for that Wednesday and Thursday. So, but it did mean that job. But the other thing was, we had also onboarded another customer the week before, and there was a whole lot of issues that had come up. We lost an employee to he went out on medical leave just 2 days after we onboarded this customer. So we began again being under-resourced, but we had this requirement that we had to build out this data center. So we were doing a little bit of support as well from interstate, and for the guys that were still up here in the office. And it pushed out this project. But again, taking on board what I had learned and picked up, I was still making sure that what I had learned from the previous project, that we were trying to follow that and make sure that we were looking after ourselves. That was the goal. But like I said, we still kind of pushed the limit to try and get it all completed within that time frame we had.
So some lessons learned. It sounds like maybe the company was caught in a situation where they didn't have a deep enough bench for some of those eventualities. But I have to say that, having worked for businesses, sometimes, it doesn't have to be a small business or a medium sized. It can be a large business that has, small teams where, there's no resiliency or redundancy in people and skills, right? All it takes is, hey, the work's gone up a little bit, and then somebody gets sick, and all of a sudden you're in a world of hurt. You don't have any redundancy necessarily built into the system. It's really difficult to build up a system like that where you have people who can just step in, and okay, this person's working 45 hours this week instead of 40 hours, but we have everything covered. That very, very difficult to have that happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I found that we were adequately staffed, but yes, having that person drop out straight after we had onboarded a customer that he was the tech lead for, it threw a lot out of scope for us. But we had this other project that had to be completed. We had customers because we had to move into a new data center in a short time frame, because we had a partnership with a partner that went sour, and we were doing a shared rack situation. So they were just going to turn off our equipment in their rack. So we had to build out a new one. So we had a situation where we had to make sure we got that completed as well. So we're trying to support a newly onboarded customer and give them the best experience for any of the teething issues that we had. At the same time, we had this pressure of, well, we're going to lose all these customers if this company turns off our equipment. So we always had an agreement of when that would happen, but we had to make sure that everything was in place. We had customers migrated. There was still follow-on tasks to do afterwards. So it made that pressure made it a lot harder. And yeah, losing someone in the team right at that sort of critical moment really put the pressure up even more. And we had a small team to begin with. And the issue with small teams is you may also be like a level 1 to level 3 across 3 people. You are answering the phone at the same time you are upgrading the VMware platform, or you're upgrading Citrix or something like that in the background. So it does make it hard, and things like documentation that could end up getting skipped as well.
Yeah, it's never that easy to say, hey, we're not going to take any unplanned work because we need to complete this migration. That just doesn't seem to be realistic most of the time when you have a small team and a short deadline. Somebody has to do the triage even though you're in the middle of something big.
Yeah, it's always a question of compromises, right? Because you never have infinite resources, infinite people, infinite budget, infinite time. So it's always a matter of, what am I willing to compromise on? Sure, I don't have the perfect documentation as I'm doing things step by step, and I don't have a video camera and screen capture of what I'm doing, right? But can I go back and recreate it and have up to date documentation of exactly what was done? As long as you can, get there in the end, I think, as you said, like that's always the goal, right? And can you do everything perfectly all the time? No, you can't. So at least, you and the organization are figuring that out and figuring out the correct priorities. That's a really a positive step, I would say. I just want to be, conscious of your time. Are there other things that you've learned over time that you feel that need to be called out, or places in your life where you've been able to apply these lessons?
Yeah, I think over my time, I've sort of found things like ego going in. That like we've touched on it, but for me, I went into thinking that I knew what I was doing, and this company should hire me because I have experience in this. That's not the case. The world is different to this silo that you're in, or into that sort of your little bubble. So my ego, there have been times when I've gone into places and this company that I'm working for now actually was where I really did discover my ego. Um, like I said, I came from um, a location that was using a three-host vSphere rollout. That was it. As soon as I started in this company, I said, I'm all for vSphere. I sat down. I've gone through a certification process. I've done training. I've done all this. I've done that, and then to go in and go, oh, I've got no idea now what I'm doing. I don't have that hands-on experience because what I was doing was all in my lab as well, and it just like I caught myself out in that. It wasn't the business caught myself out. They took a chance and said, I see what you've worked on, and you got potential. You've got that to move forward with. But I sort of haven't learned about that potential that I had. It was more, I've done this, so I should be able to do this. And that was another thing I went with certification is I failed a few certifications purely based on ego, because I went, well, I've studied it and I've gone through, I've done the practice test. Excellent. That's it. I don't need to go back and review. And then I fail. And then I've gone back to, well, I want to pass this. So then, but I don't go back to the basics. And going back to the basics and going, I've done this. I've installed ESXi 1,000 times. I know exactly what I'm doing. But I haven't actually done it on a SAN and done SAN boot, or I haven't done this. And I haven't done sort of those, finding out what I hadn't known as well. But if I hadn't have gone back and done that, then those questions I'm getting asked and, well, I don't know that. But I went, well, I've installed it, so I know exactly what I'm doing. It's that having that ego and going in with that. It's just it. Yeah, I caught myself out many times with that. So that's one thing that I found myself as a big risk that I've created for myself. So so my advice sort of would be find out, look at yourself, reflect, and know what you want to be able to achieve, but also what is your business asking for? What do you know? And what is the bigger world? What are other people doing? I mean, listening to the community and seeing that other people are using Sandboot, and you go, well, I've never come across that, but other people are. What if I go into a business that is using that? I need to know that. So I need to study that. I need to study this. Kubernetes, that people are, that's big now. People are using that. What if I go into a business where I am there as their vSphere admin, but they're using Kubernetes? I don't know that. Having a little bit of that exposure as well, and knowing that, yes, I know the whole vSphere side, but how does that interact? How does that whole piece come together? Or how does not sitting myself into a bubble and just going, I know this bit, is probably my biggest sort of thing I've found about myself.
That's so interesting. I mean, I've fallen into that hole myself, like, you look at this technology description, like I'll just take your example, like, boot from SAN. And if you don't do that, it feels like an edge case, right? It's like, oh, I've done this, so many times, and we've never made that choice, and it feels like, almost like a minor, detour off the main path. But to somebody else, it could be their entire world. They might manage, an environment 10 times the size of yours, or there might be 30 people out there who've walked, a very similar path, but they've done nothing but make this, choice that to you feels like an edge choice, or a non-standard choice. You just don't know what's out there. And it's a really good call out. I really like that.
Yeah, and I think one main thing now that I'm really discovering is how software development works, or how automation works. I've done a little bit of automation in the past, but I've always had this view that, well, software works. You click here, click that. This is how it works. Knowing full well that people sit down and write code, but not understanding the process in writing code and what software developers are going through to write code. And when I look at automating, for a number of years, when automation was becoming more talked about, it was trying to, I'd look at it and go, oh, that's too much. No one would write that much. That's too long. And then over time, I've actually started to break down that and go, no, what it is it's an automated process. You can break it down and go, all right, this is the step I want to perform this step, move on to the next step, and just write it out like a recipe, that process. But at the same time, you're testing, does this line work? Does that work? It's not just sitting there writing. And breaking it down, I've managed to start writing more and more automation, more code than that. And again, it was a bit of well, I've never seen anyone actually sit down and develop something before. So my view of it has always been, that's, you click on a couple of things and that's it. You drag boxes, Visual Basic, drag a couple of boxes out. Yeah, that's it. Right click, this is what I wanted to do. But it's not, it's everything that's in behind it. So trying to get that exposure was big. And I sort of feel like I've lagged in that department. I should have known about that 5 years ago, how that works, and be actually working with that myself. So I get advice on that would be get out there and do that. Understand it, different topics.
I'm really interested in reading your blog posts about learning about that.
Yeah, so I've actually haven't written a blog post, but I did my first Git commit not too long ago. So I had planned on writing a blog post about that, the process that I went through writing that full automated script, and that was for a rubric deployment. So that got really big exposure when I as a tweet, but I want to build a blog post around that, and it's been on my mind. So now that I've said it, I'm going to have to do it. But yes, it's definitely there on my list that there will be a blog post talking about what the process I went through to be able to also break down in my mind how automation, how software development occurs. And then it's just opened up this other world of, well, I want to write more. I don't want to become a software developer, but I want to be able to automate more. I want to be able to streamline my tasks and that. Because there are times where I went, well, this vSphere cluster, needs 4 new hosts. Look, I'm just going to manually do some bits, or I'd just write a line that said set all DNS to this across all 4 hosts, but that's it. And that's where I stopped. I wouldn't do more because it was too much. It would take longer to write that than to do the 4 hosts manually. But then once I started breaking it down and going, well, actually spending the time, and then later on we'll have the same thing, and you just go change these couple of variables, and that's it, and run it. It saves a lot more time later on, and it's just breaking that down.
That's good stuff. John, I think this might be the first show where we've helped a guest give themselves homework assignments, because that's 2 now. A presentation that he has to do and some blog posts. So keep going, Keiran. We're going to get you a list of like top 10. It's going to be great.
Let's not be shy. We're assigning the homework, right? We've invited Keiran on as a guest to, as a favor to us, to explain a really interesting blog post that he's written, and then somehow we've assigned him work, and somehow we feel okay about it. I mean, at least I feel iffy about it, but I'm still gonna ask about it.
It's for his own good. It's for his own good.
There you go.
Well, I think the assignment first was getting on the podcast. So that's step 1.
No, that was a favor. We'll cop to that, asking for a favor. Is there anything else that you'd like to cover before we break for the evening, or for you for the afternoon?
I think we're pretty good there actually at the moment. Do you have any other follow-up questions on any of that, or?
I would just ask, can you give out your Twitter handle? Is it okay for people to follow up with you if they want to ask more questions about the things we've discussed in this episode?
Yeah, absolutely. My blog, if you want to read the blog post we discussed today, is readysetvirtual.com. That's from my love of Formula One. And my Twitter handle is at Keiran_Shelden. So yeah, definitely hit me up. I need to get up to those 1,000 followers soon.
Oh wow, 1,000 followers. Okay, yeah, we'll magnify that somehow. Like maybe your 1,000 followers can listen to our episode.
Yeah,
who's doing who a favor? Yeah, that's right.
I don't even think I hit 300 yet.
Our tens of listeners will bump that up. Maybe our hundreds of thousands of followers will, I'm sure, be interested in your blog posts. I mean, it's more pressure on you, of course, to bring our giant audience to your future posts. But I'm sure you can handle that now that you have all these skills that you've talked about.
Yeah, no pressure to write anymore.
I think that's a third homework assignment to get to 1,000 followers, right? That's 3, man.
Hey,
yeah, well,
that 1,000 I've been waiting, but look, it's not about the amount of followers you have. It's just the content you put out there.
There you go.
That's what really matters, and good content, and the followers will come.
Even more wisdom. Keiran, thank you so much for your time. It's been extremely valuable for me to both read this blog post and to interact with you and hear your thoughts and how, where you were then and how you've evolved since. It's been really terrific.
Yeah, we sure appreciate you taking the time, Keiran, especially since you're in the future.
Well, that's it. I don't know if I can give you back the time and pass it over into the past, but we can certainly see how it goes. But thank you for having me on. It's certainly has been a pleasure to be on, and especially given that this was my first podcast, it's certainly been a journey.
Sounds like the journey continues.
That nerd journey. All right. Thank you so much, Keiran.
No worries. Thank you.
I'm impressed with the way Keiran was able to learn from his experiences and improve things when he faced a similar situation in the future. And I learned something in this episode too, John. The John White School of Mentoring comes with homework. And you definitely dished out some for Keiran.
Oh man, I hope that wasn't too obnoxious. I definitely want to see what he has to say about automation, though. Oh, and I know we talked about ego before the interview, but after listening, I think that Kieran identifies it really well. Ego and fear combined with a dash of imposter syndrome. That's definitely a recipe for trouble.
I feel like that should be on an episode of The More You Know. But honestly, identifying those traits and behaviors and being mindful of them moving forward is the only way to self improvement. Does that sound like something Master Yoda would say? I don't know, but that was a great discussion.
I was impressed that he had the level of self awareness to actually put out a blog post on the topic in the heat of the moment. I don't think I've ever done that in a similar situation. Yeah, definitely not. Just in the heat of the moment, I would just be a puddle on the floor. Well, Nick, anything pop into your mind before we get out of here?
Other than encouraging our listeners not to turn into a puddle on the floor, I'd say no. Just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey, and that is where you tweet if you want to subscribe to the John White School of Mentoring. Comes with homework, pricing and packaging to come.
Yeah, be ready for that homework, apparently. I didn't even know that I was going to do that. Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at VJourneyman for Nick Cordy at Network Nerd _ signing off.
Adios. 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. Smash that button. I'm certainly impressed with the way Keiran was able to learn from his experience and improve. let's just do that again. All right. I'm cool. You can be cool.